Welcome to the Hay Kings podcast, brought to you by Vermeer, your expert in hay and forage equipment. Today on the podcast, we welcome Dylan Tiemeyer. We're going to talk about rakes. Although it's simple and low cost to implement on most operations, the hay rake can make a big difference in your forage crops and its value and overall quality. Today we're going to be talking about different types of rakes and their impact on forage quality and what types of rakes might work best in different scenarios. Dylan, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
You bet, John. Appreciate you having me. Excited to talk about some rakes today. I am the territory sales manager covering Nebraska, central and southern Wyoming as a territory. I've been with Vermeer. This was my second hay season, as we like to call it, and going on to my third year with the company. Grew up in agriculture, like a lot of us did at Vermeer. I'm a native of western Kansas, so a little different than kind of where I've been in Nebraska now for the last going on 5 years, but we made the transition and it's been a good one. So, one of the things I enjoy most about my role with Vermeer is working with dealers and customers that are just as passionate about the agricultural industry as what we are. I enjoy making customers more efficient. I think that's kind of all of our goal of us that work in agricultural industry. So again, I appreciate you having me and I look forward to talking about some rakes.
Can you tell me what are the three main types of rakes? We're going to set tedders aside here, just talking about rakes.
So talking about rakes specifically, it's one of those things that over the years, probably one of the least changed pieces of agricultural equipment. Obviously, every manufacturer kind of has their own methods that they find to be the most effective, and they kind of roll with that. But the hay rake from the very beginning has not divulged as much as, say, your combines and some of your larger implements have. But nonetheless, every manufacturer has made their own unique advancements in technology. And we'll talk a little bit about what sets ours apart. But wheel rakes are the most common type of rake, North American forage operations, mostly because of their simplicity and low entry-level cost. They can cover a lot of ground fairly quickly. They're ground-driven and simple to pull with pretty low horsepower tractors. So you don't need a great big 200-horse tractor to get an entry-level rake. On next, you have your twin rakes or bar rakes. They're typically referred to as power rakes, hydraulic rakes, but there's some different terminology depending on where you are in the country. Vermeer, we most often refer to them as twin rakes. They're hydraulically driven and can handle heavier, wetter forages in addition to performing well in dry hay. These rakes are known for creating really good-looking windrows and keeping ash content like dirt out of the forage and make a bit better than other rakes might, a bit better windrow. And lastly, rotary rakes. They're also a hydraulically driven rake. They can handle a wide variety of forage types as well. They tend to work a little better in your mountainous, more hilly regions. They cover a little bit lower rake width. But those would be the kind of the three types of rake that we work with at Vermeer.
As a producer's considering what kind of rake to use, what questions should people be asking about the rakes and looking at in their operation to make that determination on a purchase?
Some of the questions that we and our dealers like to ask our customers, for one, would be how many acres are you looking at covering with this rake per year? How rough and what size are your hay fields? What types of forages are you going to rake? What moisture levels will those forages be? And of course, what's your budget? That seems to probably be the biggest deciding factor when purchasing any piece of ag equipment. Obviously, what we kind of lean to here is on your wheel rakes, they're going to be able to, back to them being the most common rake used in North America. You can use them in a wide variety of fields, whether they be smooth or rougher fields, different types of crop, grass hays, alfalfa, sedan grasses, cane, corn stalks, whereas your hydraulic rake is going to be a little bit more specific to your, I don't want to say smoother fields, but your grass hays, alfalfa, stuff that's not ridged like your corn stalks might be. Of course, the question always is, what's the customer's end game? We see a lot of guys nowadays grinding material to go into a TMR mixer, at which point those hydraulic power rakes seem to be a little bit better option back to keeping that ash content out of the grinded product. When they go to grind that bale, they see a lot less dirt and dust and, as we call it, ash in that product. So,
real quick, the reason we call it ash is when you send that forage sample into the lab, they actually burn it and see what is physically left, what portion of that is physically left. And when you get into things like dirt that doesn't burn, that's left in the sample, and under 10% is a relatively good number on ash. So just a little context there.
You bet. Yeah, I appreciate it. That's actually was news to me. I was not aware of that. So
the lower that number, the better.
Sure.
But it's also really hard to get under that, like 4 and 5 and 6%. That's kind of the lower threshold.
Right. Growing up in Western Kansas, we fed a lot of cattle with hydrobed and unrolled all of our hay that we fed to our cattle. And, when doing that method of feeding, your ash content was not, I don't want to say a big deal, but it wasn't a noticeable factor when you were out there in the wintertime unrolling a bale versus, now we see a lot more producers going to the bale processors and the grinders to go into a TMR mixer, at which point we see a lot more customers concerned about that ash content in their hay.
What's going to be our fastest option, and what determines what's the fastest option?
Fastest as far as rake speed?
Looking at acres that you'll cover in a day.
Sure. If we wanted to kind of dive into some of our different types, I'm going to say wheel rakes are going to be your productivity per hour. They're going to be your best option. With wheel rakes at Vermeer, we have a 8-wheel, 10-wheel, 12-wheel, and then our high-capacity series, we have our 14-wheel and our 20-wheel. You get up into those high-capacity rakes, the 14-wheel, for instance, that covers a 28-foot rake width, and your 20-wheel covers a 40-foot rake width versus your smaller wheel rakes covering 20-foot, 22, and 24 feet. And back to your rotary rake, typically covering a little bit smaller rake width. So when it comes down to your productivity per hour, a wheel rake most often is going to be your best bet. Ground speed's able to be higher, and back to the, clear up to 40-foot rake width, referring to our rakes at Vermeer.
I'm just doing some math here really quick. A mile is 5,280 feet, 5 miles an hour. Get you 26,000 feet in an hour times 40 feet, and 43,560 square feet in an acre. 40 feet wide at 5 miles an hour gets you 25 acres an hour. That's fairly fast.
That is pretty good production, and I will say I would like to see guys running that 5 mile an hour, but most of the time when a rainstorm's coming that night, they're going a lot faster than 5 mile an hour.
You might be pushing it.
You could probably bump that production up to double that in most hay operations. It seems over the years everything's gotten faster, and guys like to rake faster than what they did 10, 20, 30 years ago. So
now, talking about a 40-foot rake in a small field, that might not be a good option, right?
Correct. When we get into our smaller fields, in fact, I'm going to use an example of one customer of ours who is a custom operator, runs a couple of our self-propelled balers. He actually has one of the 14-wheel high-capacity rakes for his bigger fields, his rougher fields that he's raking corn stalks, so on. But he's also got one of our 12-wheel rakes, or we call Mccarter Rake, that covers 24 feet. So you're not sacrificing a whole lot of production, maybe a little bit of ground speed, because it's, again, not a high-capacity rake. But he uses that rake to do a lot of his pivot corners and his smaller nook and cranny type fields versus that 14-wheel or 20-wheel rake, where it's not a carded rake and it all folds up instead of coming up on top of the frame to transport. It's a little bit more of a bugger to get it back in some of these smaller fields. You've made hay your whole life too, and you know what it's like going down some of these trail roads to get back into places. A lot of times anything you can gain in transport efficiency is a win.
Oh, there's some limitations on road widths, and some of the fields, the gates are an issue sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
Our carded rakes are our best selling rake, just beginning with the fact that they are the best entry-level price point, but also they are a good low-cost option for your larger hay operators to be able to have as kind of a backup rake / rake for their tougher-to-get-to fields as well.
Take me through the different types of hay and the different moisture content. So say that I'm doing some October alfalfa, and for me that's really late third cutting that's really wet and hard to get dry. What would work well in that scenario versus, the 4th of July when it's 100 degrees and everything dries in 2 or 3 days?
Right. So to touch on that a little bit, for your wetter type forages, I would definitely recommend your hydraulic power rake, mainly because of the motion at which it throws the forage product into its windrow, is able to provide it with a little bit better opportunity to dry down versus, say, your wheel rake would. When it comes to alfalfa and grass hay, for that matter, too, a lot of producers like, and again, this is guys that aren't going into a grinder right away. Guys like to kind of typically in my area run that 15 to 20% moisture. We all know sometimes you got to push and be a little higher than that. It's just the reality of how things go. That some parts of your field are going to be 26% and others are 16, and chances are you're going to keep running and bail up everything at the pretending it's all 16, even though that's not the case.
Right.
So when that is the option, your guy who's doing a majority of alfalfa, and this last couple of years in Nebraska, with the flooding and everything, we've had some higher moisture content forage than what we've seen in years prior. And we've seen a little bit of an uptick in our hydraulic basket rakes because of that. And also, a lot of times your guys that are doing large numbers of grass and alfalfa hay typically aren't doing the numbers of cornstalk hay. So that hydraulic rake's a little bit better in those types of crops where, our wheel rake gives you the opportunity. Well, every company's got their own. Most of them have a suspension spring on each wheel to help the wheel rakes kind of follow the ground contour. Ours runs a hydraulic cylinder on each wheel instead. And with that kind of gives it that opportunity to do better in your rougher fields, your pothole type fields, ridge corn stalks, where if you're not doing a lot of that type material, doing more of your grass hays, hydraulic rake's going to be a little bit better option for you.
All right. A minute ago, you were talking about the hydraulic-driven rakes and how they handle wet, heavy windrows a little different. And what you're getting at there is the shape of the windrow.
Correct.
So
yeah.
What is the shape and size of that windrow? How does that come into play?
So with that hydraulic rake, you're able to make a little bit more of a pretty rectangular shaped windrow versus a wheel rake. You're going to get more of that kind of gob of product thrown into that windrow. The way that hydraulic rake grabs the product and tosses it, it's able to kind of shape it in a nice square, wider windrow, giving it an opportunity to dry down a little bit better. Your wheel rake does a fine job. Obviously, that's why they're the most common rake in North America. But when you're fighting moisture, that hydraulic rake, because of the shape of the windrow, the good square rectangular windrow gives you a little bit better chance at dry down. And mainly that's because your windrow is a consistent thickness throughout it. It's not, your wheel rake, when all that product gets jammed in there, on your outside edges, you might be 6 inches width on the outside of your windrow, but 36 inches in the middle, because it just, again, throws it kind of all into a gob, especially when you're in higher yielding hay. Your hydraulic rake, again, you're going to have more of a consistent, probably within a few inches, windrow across the entire 5 foot, 4 foot, whatever you set your rake width to.
In my experience, where you have some moisture coming up out of the ground from one day to the next, you wick moisture up. Those hydraulic rakes do a better job of inverting the windrow to get the bottom up to where it'll dry.
Correct. Yeah, and we actually, on both our hydraulic rakes and our wheel rakes, we offer what we call a center windrow splitter, and that kind of helps with that as well, what you're referring to. It helps, you throw that forage product in towards your windrow, but it also splits the middle of the windrow apart as well, so that you're not just pulling your outer windrows in on top of your inner windrows. You're actually splitting that center windrow as well.
One of my other tenets is that the shape and weight of the bale is often dictated by the consistency of the windrow.
Yes, that's correct. It's a pretty common misconception. We run into this a lot talking to producers, that the baler makes the bale, and that you can have the cheapest old rake that you get on any old farm auction, and if you have a good baler, it's going to make a pretty bale. And sometimes you can compensate with a good baler, no doubt, but What a lot of guys don't understand is that your bale appearance starts with the rake. If you don't have a nice square windrow in front of that baler, you're not setting your baler up for a very good chance of success.
And that's the case whether we're talking about small squares, round bales, or big squares.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think it matters whether you're talking a small square, large square, 4-foot round baler, 5-foot round baler. Having a nice square, heavy, consistent windrow in front of your baler is going to set you up for success. Yeah, bale appearance always starts with the windrow. It's really important to keep windrows even across the bale chamber in order to get a good looking product when the bale is kicked out.
And then the ideal windrow, exactly what you're looking for there?
When I refer to your ideal windrow, in this country, we have a lot of 6x5 large round balers. So we kind of like a 5-foot windrow in front of that baler. Windrows that are considerably wider than that, than the baling chamber, may result in what I call a saddle-shaped bale, whereas dome-shaped windrows might turn into a bale that's taller in the middle than the outside. I call them football-shaped bales or egg-shaped bales. So the ideal windrow is exactly the width of the chamber. So it's pretty simple, but then again, it gets missed quite a lot in the world of raking hay.
And which rake makes the best windrow?
Without a doubt, the power rake, the twin basket rake, like our models being the R23 or 2800, just again, because of the reasoning that they make that nice square rectangle shape, consistent looking windrow. I tell guys all the time, if you don't have a large variety of crops that you're raking together, if you're mainly grasses, alfalfas, and not doing anything in the corn stalk side of things, or a large variety of crop, a hydraulic rake is what you need to be having in your operation. There's no comparison, the windrow that a hydraulic rake puts out behind it, with any other rake on the market.
I completely agree. In fact, I actually have a hydraulic driven twin rake.
Yep.
So I would absolutely agree with that. Now, you've talked through some of the different types of rakes, but can you take us through the full lineup that Vermeer has?
You bet. Starting off, we have our VR series that makes up our wheel rake family, and within that realm, we have 5 different submodels. Starting with our Vermeer VR 820, that is a 8-wheel, 20-foot rake width. Then that moves up to your 10-wheel, 22-foot rake width, our VR 1022, and then up to our VR 1224. So every number on our rakes means something. We try to kind of keep that consistent across all our product offerings at Vermeer. But those would be our standard capacity VR series wheel rakes, would be our 820, 1022, and 1224. 8-wheel, 20-foot, 10-wheel, 22-foot, 12-wheel, 24-foot. You get up above that to your high capacity offerings, and that's where we get into our VR 1428. Again, 14 wheels, 28-foot, and then our 2040, 20 wheels, 40-foot. So that would complete our wheel rake lineup at Vermeer. You get into the twin basket rake offerings, and we have our tried and true R23 and R2800s. The R23 is a 23-foot rake width, and the R2800 is a 28-foot rake width. So again, numbers mean something. Last but certainly not least product offering in the rake world at Vermeer would be our R140, the RR standing for rotary rake, and the 14 meaning 14-foot rake width.
Running those hydraulically powered rakes, with the wheel rakes, there's no hydraulic requirements, or if there is, it's just kind of an up and down cylinder. That's a very, very simple 2-hose kind of setup, maybe even sometimes a single hose setup. But going to that hydraulically driven rake, sometimes you have some hydraulic flow requirements.
Sure.
What are we looking at on those, and kind of what size tractor does that relate to?
So that's a great question. A lot of times when it comes down to our R-Series twin basket rakes, it's more of a hydraulic demand issue than it is a tractor horsepower requirement. We like to see 8 gallon a minute coming out of the tractor to be able to run those hydraulic rakes at a consistent speed, where we kind of like to see them running. That would be both our 23-foot or our 28-foot basket rake. Again, there is a horsepower requirement that we recommend, which is 70 horsepower for the 2800. I want to say, I looked up the R2300, and it's a 35 horsepower tractor requirement, so it's actually lower than the rotary rake for horsepower. more often than not it being a hydraulic issue before it's a horsepower issue on those rakes. That's a great question, but we really like to see that 8 gallon a minute to give those rakes set them up for a chance to perform the best of their ability. The RR140, the rotary rake, is a little bit lower horsepower alternative to your twin basket rakes, requiring a little bit more horsepower, up around that 70 horse. But either one of them you could get by with 8 gallon a minute hydraulic flow.
Sure. We've done an episode about tedders, and I want to tie in when you might use a tedder and a rake in the same operation, in the same cutting, like in conjunction with one another.
Sure. Tedders are something that kind of just became a little bit more of a commonality in my territory here within the last year to 2 years, again, back to some wetter years than we've had in years past. We kind of like to see our customers get in there with their tedder within, 3 to 4 hours after they knock that crop down, and then get in there about a day later with their rake. Typically, that's giving you that 15 to 20% moisture content through your baler at that point, if you can give it 24 hours after tedding it before you go in and rake it.
Gotcha. So what the idea that I'm trying to get at here is tedder, spread it out, and then the rakes bring it back together.
Yeah. Go in with your mower, you layer down flat, or in a case of a conditioner, into a windrow. Get in there with your tedder 3-4 hours later, spread your windrow back apart, give it 12 to 24 hours for a chance to dry, spread clear apart, and then you can go back in there with your rake right in front of your baler. Is the philosophy is behind tedding is essentially, we call it hay in a day. It's kind of the principle. So the end game is to be able to have that forage product cut, tedded, raked, and baled within 24 to 36 hours.
That's pretty fast. Even by West Coast standards, that's fairly fast.
It is, especially are in a little bit more humid climate down where I'm at. And just the thought that you can get hay put up in 48 hours, a major improvement over what I was used to growing up, which was more like 4 to 5 days.
Right. Right. Thank you so much, Dylan. For those of you listening, if you're interested in learning more about the lineup of Vermeer rakes, you can go to www.vermeer.com/rakes. Dylan, thank you very much.
You bet.